Well, let's call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the special meeting of the CCP. Madam Clerk, can you please take a roll call of the full CCP, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Chair. Member Evans. Member Johnson.
Here.
Member Larson. Here. Member Lewis. Member Miller.
Here.
Member Nigel. Member Olson.
Here.
Member Raven.
Here.
Member Saylor. Member Valdez.
Here.
Member Vega. Member Fruitnick.
Here.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Quick housekeeping. Today's meeting is being held telephonically pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number N-29-20 issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment electronically. First up is the approval of the agenda. I don't know if we can bring that up. If not, no worries. Hope everybody's had time to look over the agenda. And if there's no issues or corrections that need to be made, can I get a motion, please?
This is Karen. I'll move.
Second from Raven, Jonathan.
All right, can we get a vote, please?
Oh, we'll try Member Evans again. Member Johnson.
Approve.
Member Larson.
Yes.
Member Lewis. Absent. Member Miller.
Aye.
And Member Nigel. Absent still. Member Olson.
Aye.
Member Raven.
Yes.
Member Saylor. Still absent. Member Valdez.
I'm going to abstain. I was not present.
Nope, I'm here. Aye.
Oh, okay. Supervisor Member Saylor's here. Okay, Member Valdez, you're going to be abstaining on the agenda. And Member Vega. Absent. And Member Fruitnick.
Yes,
Okay, motion passes.
which brings
This
us,
is member Evans. I'm present and voted aye on the minutes.
Oh, you did. Oh, great. Thank you. I noted it.
Thank you.
thank you. Brings us to item number 3. Consider approval of the July 12th, 2021 meeting minutes. If you can scroll down to that, please. Oops, I think.
Are you looking for someone to move to approve?
Good.
I have a small but very significant change.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Dale has since been promoted 2 times, so he is now the undersheriff, not a lieutenant.
Good catch. We will modify that for sure.
Although sometimes I feel like a lieutenant, so yes.
You don't work for a living anymore.
With that change, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved, Jonathan.
Okay, can I get a second, please?
Second, Olson.
All right, can we get a roll call vote?
Member Evans.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Lewis. Still absent. Member Miller.
Sorry, I had to step out during the discussion, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, Member Nigel. Absent. Okay, Member Olson.
Aye.
Member Raven.
Aye.
Member Saylor,
Aye.
Member Valdez,
Aye.
and Member Vega, still absent, and Member Fruitnick.
Aye.
And motion passes.
All right, brings us to number 4, consider approval of the July 22nd, 2021 special meeting minutes.
This is Karen. I'll move.
Can we get a second, please? If there's
Second.
no,
Second, Jonathan.
all right, I have a first and a second. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Member Evans,
Aye.
Member Johnson,
Aye.
Member Larson,
Aye.
is Member Lewis with us? Not yet. Okay, Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Nigel, absent still, Member Olson,
Abstain. I was not there.
okay, Member Raven,
Aye.
Member Saylor, is Member Saylor?
Aye.
Thank you. Member Valdez,
Aye.
Member Vega, absent still, and Member Fruitnick.
Aye.
Okay,
This is
motion
John.
passes.
This is Jonathan. I apologize, but I was not there either, so I would like to abstain.
Okay, I'll make that note.
Sorry about that.
Motion still passed.
Thank you. Brings us to agenda item number 5, public comment, opportunity for members of the public to address the CCP on subjects related to CCP business and not otherwise on the agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public speakers? Oh, Julia,
Yep, aye. We have one hand raised, Chair Seska Wright.
go ahead, Ms. Wright.
Oops, hold on. Got to unmute her. Okay, she's unmuted now.
Thank you. I was just curious why there've been so many special meetings. Sometimes the notifications have not been coming through, so it makes it challenging for the public to plan to participate. Thank you.
I don't have any additional hands raised, Chair.
All right, thank you. Brings us to number 6, member announcements. Does any member have any announcements they would like to share with the group? Not seeing any. Brings us to number 7, receive update on the SIM process. And Karen?
Thanks, Chief. And I think I can kind of a little bit address, at least for the special CCP meeting that we called, why it was done in that way. As you know, the last special CCP meeting was on July 22nd, and the purpose of that meeting was to revisit the sequential intercept map and look at the progress today, look at some of the data we've collected since then, and determine a path forward for addressing the ongoing gaps within the sequential intercept map. So the reason we needed a special meeting is because we wanted to allow the public to participate in that process, and the content of that meeting was longer than required an entire meeting in and of itself. So we did our best to let everyone know about the special meeting in advance at the last CCP meeting, and noticed it like other CCP meetings have been before. The reason this is agendized for today is because we said at that meeting we would be coming back to the CCP and kind of trying to get a will of the board in terms of where we should go next with the sequential intercept map. As we've discussed before, whenever all 7 or the majority of us get together, we have issues. It becomes a special CCP meeting, or sometimes we can't necessarily move forward some of the work in a timely fashion because of some of those requests. And we definitely want to continue to work on our gaps in our sequential intercept map and continue to avail ourselves of Mr. O'Connell's data that all of our data that Mr. O'Connell's been looking into. And so I'm trying to find out if we want to go back to the original way we addressed some of the SIM intercepts, which was we had special work groups attached to each one of the intercepts, or if we want to go down the path of having this broader group participate and have it be a more full CCP membership discussion. And so I guess I wanted to hear from the group. I know Jonathan and Tracy couldn't actually be there on the 22nd, so definitely wanted to make sure they understood what happened at that meeting and where we're trying to head. So I'm going to pause and see if anybody has feedback.
Not seeing much. I'll chime in, Karen. I like the idea of going back to the smaller groups and working on section by section. Just happens to be my preference and style, but open to however the group would like to proceed.
I think if that's the will of the group, then we would, for those prioritized areas, we would ask for representatives from your departments, maybe instead of the folks that are voting members on the CCP, to participate as we kind of dive into those prioritized areas within the sequential intercept map.
Is the SIM a CCP endeavor? Because I thought the SIM was a county endeavor that had overlaps with CCP. Are we taking it over for some reason?
I think it just gets so murky because all of the items on the SIM are also items under the purview of the CCP essentially. And so when we go to invite folks to an overview of the SIM, it happens to be everybody that's on the CCP.
Unless there's a requirement that it come through Brown Act meetings and the CCP, I would like it to go back to the actual original thing, which is the countywide endeavor. To the extent there's overlap, I get why it's here, but I think that we've made mistakes in the past by trying to push everything under the CCP umbrella. And we've tried to undo that, like grants, et cetera. So I just don't want to start another precedent on this one where we think it's a CCP item when it's really not.
Tracy, it's Jonathan. Do you think it's a good idea for the group to present to us? I mean, I'm not saying that we get our fingers in the dirt, but at least to present to us what's going on.
Sure, because I think that there's overlap. I just want to take it on as a CCP endeavor, I guess is what I'm saying. It becomes way more complicated when CCP has it. I mean, I don't know if there's any legal ramifications of either way. Phil's unmuted.
Well, I thought your question was going to be slightly different, actually. I don't know if there's legal ramifications of treating the SIM as a CCP endeavor or a countywide endeavor, other than the Brown Act issue, which you've mentioned. And frankly, I don't know where this ought to live, if it's county or CCP. I think Jonathan, makes a good point that there's enough overlap to warrant some feedback and discussion among the CCP about it, but that doesn't mean it has to be your effort. So I'm agnostic as to where it lives, and that does in turn dictate the Brown Act issue, to the extent there's a bearing on participation by CCP members.
Right. So my request would be it returns to the county, it returns to small groups like Chief Rutnick had suggested, it returns to representatives that are most knowledgeable, the subject matter experts. And then if it results in a report out to CCP, that's great.
I just want to clarify and make sure with Phil, because as we were getting ready to schedule the last July 22nd meeting, and we invited everyone from CCP, that's when we were advised to make it a special CCP meeting. But you're saying moving forward, if we have that, it would not be considered a CCP meeting? Or is that something we have to vote on?
Well, I don't remember the discussion that led to that special meeting all that clearly. I may have assumed that the SIM was a CCP thing, because I think this is where I've heard about it over time. It doesn't mean it has to be. I don't know that it naturally should be. So, I mean, to the extent I have to say, yeah, I feel differently now, maybe better understanding the full picture. Yeah, I do feel differently. That it doesn't necessarily need to be a meeting of this group. So my apologies for any confusion on that point. A meeting of the CCP, that is.
So if I'm remembering right, I think it was a ad hoc of the CCP when it was set up that it wasn't necessarily CCP meetings. We did the sequential intercept before, but it was an ad hoc subcommittee of the CCP that broke up into each intercept, and we met monthly for 9 months and then came back and did updated reports to the CCP. And when we did the final conclusion, the CCP, I believe, voted at the time, or there was a decision made that we would be stopping that process. We've got the SIM with the updated and prioritized gaps at the time, and that the work would continue with the CCP and align with the CCP strategic plan, because there is so much overlap in criminal justice behavioral health. Not saying that that's what the CCP has to vote to do now, but that was how we wrapped up the last session. And I do think it makes sense to take chunks rather than the whole system to review, especially if we're going to update and make adjustments and everything. I would just caution against the exact process we used last time, because I know some folks here were on that. We did 6 meetings monthly for 9 months, and it was a lot of time and energy spent there versus maybe we still chunk it up, but we spend, one intercept has a 2 to 3 hour meeting or something to update that piece and bring it back to the larger group, and we move it forward that way.
It seems like the consensus is it doesn't need to be a CCP. It doesn't need to be tied to CCP, but there's a general desire to have us, whoever is on that work group, come back and report out on what's happening with the SIM at some interval. And so I think what we can do is work, if it's okay with everyone, work with Kevin O'Connell to schedule some of those targeted groups to meet. And send that notification out to each of you as representatives, and you can determine who's the most appropriate person to participate from your department. Does that sound okay? I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. So it doesn't seem like something we necessarily have to vote on. I just wanted to circle back with this group and make sure we were on the right track.
It looks like we have, most people are shaking their heads or giving a thumbs up. So looks like we have some direction from the members.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Brings us to number 8, consider approval of revised CCP bylaws. And this is Eric.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Eric Will, CCP analyst. So today, this first set of CCP budget items relates to our discussion of the bylaws previously. And so if everyone will remember from the last CCP meeting, not the special meeting, but the meeting back on July 12th, that this group discussed the idea of amending the bylaws to include the CCP budget policy document that we had discussed at length in that meeting. And so in that meeting, there was one voted on piece, which was to remove the language. If we could actually go down in the, thank you so much, Julie. We can keep going down, or actually it might be above, my apologies. So it'll be under attachment C. Okay, and okay.
Is that the one you want, Eric?
So we'll just go up. I apologize. I'm not being clear. We'll go up 2 more pages. So not this one, but the should be right there at the top of that second page. Thank you. Okay, so the big change that occurred that this group had voted on was the strike through of the language related to the county alcohol and drug administrator in terms of tying votes to that position as they related to treatment. However, it was recommended that instead that those subject matter experts can be used in terms of the process of vetting things out, but not as a formal vote of the CCP. Other than that, there were just several suggestions received, but one of the other major pieces of this was that we had received the request that Chad Rindy, our CFO for the county, actually go through these policies and make sure that they aligned with what the CCP, our staff, had put together. And so if we go down, Julie, just to where all the redlining is.
Can I make a comment really quickly before you go?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. So I'm looking in the middle of page 2 on attachment C up above. It starts with the paragraph, should a department overspend? And I'm just wondering, how can a department overspend? I mean, they're getting an allotment of money, and if they overspend, it should come out of their own pocket. Why would they overspend CCP money? How is that possible? And it shouldn't be. If they go over, they need to cover it. I mean, our office too, of course.
So is that a recommendation that we should change the language, or?
Yes,
Okay.
And I don't know if we need, then I don't know if we would need any of that paragraph, would we? Because, I mean, unless people disagree with me, we all should stay within our means and not overspend. And if we do, it shouldn't come out, shouldn't be CCP money.
Can I address that question?
I was going to say Chad could weigh in.
Oh, Chad Rindy here, County Chief Financial Officer. So when you get down to my red lines a little bit later, in past we've had a practice where certain departments had positions that were allocated to the CCP would spend directly out of the CCP fund. And so if those positions had overtime or additional costs, those costs would have been charged to the CCP. So that could involve overtime for a variety of different departments. And that would be the typical or the most common path that would lead to over expenditure. In my revisions below, one of them that I had was asking to get direction to realign the budgets where each department would request reimbursement rather than spending directly out of the CCP. And what I talked about with the probation department was that they would approve the reimbursements of other departments while I would approve a probation's department. And we would not have authority to approve any reimbursements beyond what the budget has been approved. And so a department would have to come back if they had additional budget needs to the CCP if that were to occur. So we've effectively solved that problem moving forward.
If I'm understanding you, Chad, then is it correct we don't need that paragraph, or do we?
We have in the second part of this attachment, we have my edits, and that was one of them. And so it adjusts or adapts that paragraph and changes the language to clarify that. So that is adapted in my red line version below.
Okay, so it's changed. So it's the same document?
Same document.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The other changes that I had, just for clarity, was that we were asking for treatment and innovation proposals to come by February of each year. That's when decision packages for augmentations come for all departments. And so that was one edit to align with our budget timeline in this document. Another was that there was references to the desire to follow the county's reserve policy. There wasn't a lot of discussion there, but I wanted to make sure at least the main criteria of the county's reserve policy was known to the CCP. That is a 10% target for average expenditures. That reserve is designed to mitigate mainly in the CCP against funding loss. So future years where you have a significant decline in funding. And that reserve is normally used either in the budget process or when there's fiscal distress. Another area that I changed was there was discussion about the rollover process and departments being given the right to an automatic 25% rollover. We call it carryover in our budget terminology. But right now, all of our carryovers are required to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. And so to align with that, we ask that each carryover indicate the specific purpose for the carryover. So why are you carrying it over? What's the benefit of doing so? And to have each one reviewed and approved by the CCP. We changed the timeline a little bit so that would be done either in July or August. so that the amounts of the carry forward would be known. So we're not estimating carry forwards before we've actually kind of closed out the expenditures for the year. And then we had another change to make all of CCP reimbursement based, as I talked about a little bit earlier, that would allow or prevent any type of overspending to occur. The last item was there was discussion on data outcomes related to the budget. And my understanding from the last CCP conversation was that was a topic that was still being explored, and maybe there's going to be a subcommittee formed on that. And so that at the last part of this attachment was strike through for that effort to occur. So those are the main areas of my edits, and I'm happy to answer any questions or turn it back over to Eric if there's any more you have left in your presentation.
Thank you, Chad. So that actually covers, I think, most of what I was going to say. Is we have in the packet 2 documents. One was the original policy language with the strike through that we had discussed previously. The second being the red lines that Chad has provided to ensure alignment with what the Department of Financial Services is doing in their efforts, making sure that the CCP language is aligned with that. And so at this time, I think the purpose of doing this was there was the request for the CFO's comments to be considered as part of the CCP, and now we're bringing this back to this group for comments, questions to Chad about any of those major comments or changes to the language.
I have a few comments. It's Jonathan. The first is under allocations. We're talking about treatment or innovation dollars and assigning kind of the administrative piece to one of the departments, if I'm reading it right. And I was thinking to have some consistency, maybe the CAO could take on that role because we are funding the CAO out of CCP for administrative costs, or possibly probation because they're getting some administrative dollars. I'm not sure it makes sense to pick and choose different departments to administer treatment allocations or innovation allocations.
I think part of the reason we were talking about HHSA holding maybe the treatment funds is like for several of for the current treatment allocation that comes out of CCP, you'll remember, Jonathan, that we use that to draw down those additional federal funds. So we use that as our match to draw down the federal funds. It might behoove us to do that with some of the other treatment dollars. There may be an opportunity for us to draw down additional state or federal funds with those, but obviously I'm open to whatever the group thinks is best.
Yeah, and that sounds very reasonable because you guys are sort of the experts. I guess I was thinking more like innovation of some other department, some outside entity, a CBO, and the DA or the public defender doing the administrative piece, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I understand, totally makes sense that you guys HHSA would handle administration over treatment dollars. But I was thinking, other than that, if it would be possible that maybe CAO could do it since they are getting dollars from the administrative end, or maybe probation since they're getting some money also for administration.
And the policy in these edits still allow discretion, and so it'd be up to the CCP at what time to determine the appropriate department to administer these contracts or agreements.
I mean, we can leave it open. That was just a comment. I mean, maybe we don't have to change it, just. I have a few more comments on this. So there's a paragraph that starts, should the CCP, down at the bottom. I've read the last sentence many, many times, and it doesn't make sense to me. It seems like it's a fragment, but maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. It just doesn't seem that last, but not in either the treatment or it just doesn't make sense. I don't know if it's missing a word or something.
I will take a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's awkward for sure.
And then just a couple, looking at the start of the next page, that that sentence, that first sentence doesn't really make sense to me either. And I think you're missing an R in the word for. So that if people can read over that sentence, these roll. So it's for the purposes for which the funds need to be rolled over. And maybe you could wordsmith that, Eric.
And that's essentially asking why do you need to roll the funds over? What purpose are you going to continue to utilize those funds for? And so there needs to be some type of benefit for rolling over funds, and that's what the department needs to articulate with their rollover carry forward request. There may be a way to word that more plainly.
Yeah. And then finally, under budget reporting, I think you're missing an and after the word develop. Maybe I'm wrong, but.
I will take a look at that as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Tracy, your hand was up next. I'm gonna go to the undersheriff and then Supervisor Saylor.
Okay, thank you. A few things. One, as far as I want to confirm, and Chad, I think you could maybe answer this. If we do a 10% reserve, our current reserve plus our uncommitted funds are sufficient. Like we already have that 10% set aside now, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then I wanted to just talk about what, and I'm only speaking for myself because if anyone else on the ad hoc committee disagrees, I hope that they chime in. But I think that one of the things that we as an ad hoc committee had intended to convey is that we want each department to be pretty self-sufficient year over year. So the reason we did this budget-based or this percentage-based budgeting is so that we didn't have to come back every year and look to see if anyone went over and needed to be given extra funds, et cetera. And the reason we wanted to have carryovers remain with the department is so people could plan ahead. So I'm kind of concerned with the way this is written. I don't know if I just want to ensure that I'm reading it correctly. So for instance, one of those paragraphs that Jonathan had pointed out where it started with the word should, and it talked about reserve, it seemed to say that if there was extra money, like unspent money, it would go into the reserve, which then in my mind means the reserve can go above 10%. And is that right?
So the reserve is reconsidered annually during your budget process. So the CCP can lower the reserve if they felt that was wise or necessary. But the target reserve is 10%. So if the amount of funds going into the next year, if your fund balance is higher than 10%, you have a policy decision if you want to keep it higher or if you want to move some of that into appropriate into the percentage-based calculation. So you still have discretion.
Okay, so I mean, the way I viewed it, that our goal would be is to always have 10%. If one year we had to go into it, then the next year we had extra money, we would try to get that back up to 10%. But then anything above it, and I understand what you're saying, it's a year-to-year decision, would go back into that big pot for redistribution according to the percentages. So treatment would get 25% of whatever that extra might be, DA would get 4.5%, et cetera. So is my understanding consistent with the way this is written?
That your understanding is consistent with how I intended to write this for the CCP.
Okay. And then I agree with Jonathan about his questions about if people go over. I don't have a problem, Chad, with any of the changes that you wrote. I just want to make sure again that my understanding is consistent with what you wrote, which is the strong presumption is that departments will not be reimbursed if they go over their allocation. It's a year-to-year decision, but you live within your means, and it's written so that we can analyze that each year, right?
That's correct. And by moving the spending where departments are not spending directly out of CCP, but requesting a periodic, we use the example here of a quarterly reimbursement, that will prevent the over expenditure.
Okay, and then the last thing, the rollovers to departments, I think that, I mean, this first year, a lot of us are probably going to have savings just because of hiring timelines. But I think the intent was that departments do get to keep their money. And forget the 25%, you know, arbitrary amount we put in there, that they do get to keep their money, because we know that if our allocation goes down next year, which it probably will, because we got an unusually high allocation this year, we want to encourage all departments to account for, if you get a new FTE, raises, if COLAs, merit increases, and downturns in your department allocation, actual money. So I think that, I don't know if we need to put that into this, but I want it to be very clear that I thought the presumption was departments get to keep their rollover, subject to a review by CCP to make sure people aren't stockpiling, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but really to try to make people as self-reliant as possible. And if they want to make a decision this year that they hire a little bit later because they think they'll need the money less next year, that's encouraged and not penalized by having to give it back. That's all I have to say.
So the way we had adapted this was to make the roll forwards not automatic. You still have to request them, and that's because in our countywide budget policies, roll forwards are subject to the approval of the Board of Supervisors. So by having the CCP review and approve those, it would be consistent with that. So we didn't add to the policy any automatic lever, and what you're talking about is the kind of the spirit of the conversation that I think the CCP can still honor, but they'll review the roll forward requests annually.
Okay, I said that was a lot. The only thing that I would like to know from the CCP is if anyone disagrees with the spirit of what I just said, then maybe I'd like to change the language. But if everyone's on the same page and the language is sufficient, then I would leave it alone.
Is there any comments specific to Tracy's question about clarifying the language, and then we'll move on to the undersheriff and Supervisor Saylor? Or if I,
Dan, what would you suggest if you were to clarify it? Can you be specific about what language you might suggest?
If we were to clarify, it'd be that the presumption would be that departments would maintain their allocations from year over year, subject to review by the CCP. But the presumption or the default would be that you keep it, and it would take something unusual or extraordinary for you have to give that back. So I would expect, for instance, let's say I kept $50,000, and I would say, well, it's because I'm expecting a downturn in my allocation and I needed to pay for this FTE, or I'm expecting to have a raise, et cetera. So I do think that it should come with an explanation, but I strongly think that departments should be able to count on in the immediate years ahead that is their money, so that it's instead of a year-to-year budget, it's almost like they're creating in their minds. Like what I do is I try to create a 2, 3, 4 year budget. So I'm trying to plan ahead for, if I spend this today, what's it going to cost me the next year and the next year and the next year, and then I'll spend my money accordingly. But if I'm risking having to give all that money back, then I would approach it differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Under Sheriff Johnson.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to go back to some of the language. I know we talked about it on July 12th, and I thought it would have been added, but I want to go back to treatment definition. If you just want to go back to the original document, I just want to add a few things in there again. I believe mental health or substance use disorder treatment or other programming that improves recidivism rates. I think that needs to be added in there. I think we need to then strike out the likelihood, but the successful employment in the community. Addresses criminogenic needs through a behavioral health lens. And I think that we need to add funded programs should be evidence-based. I talked about it on July 12th, and I think we need to add those. It has to be evidence-based, and we have to reduce recidivism. That's what it's all about, what we're doing here. if we can go further into innovation definition, turning an idea into a solution, the best services clients improves outcomes for offenders. Innovation introduces either new practices or approaches or changes to existing practices or approaches with the potential to significantly improve services and outcomes. These programs funded may be not need to be evidence-based, but strict outcome measurements should be collected and monitored. So I do think we need to add programs funded may not need to be evidence-based, but strict outcome measurements should be collected and monitored.
And I agree with Dale on that. Those are good points. And I noticed that some of the proposals that I saw for today, they talk about numbers, you know, how many people were touched. But I think it's important to look at other outcome measures like recidivism and jail bed days. And I know some of those were missing from some of the proposals. So I agree with Dale, and I think we all agree about how important the outcome measures are.
I was hoping, Chair, that you could, we can get some sort of agreement on that. I think, again, I thought we discussed this at the July 12th meeting, and I was hoping that would be added to it, and it wasn't.
Absolutely. I'll open it up to the group for comment on Dale's suggested changes to the definitions. Supervisor.
Dan, I have a comment on that, but also a different comment after this topic. But my question on the suggestions that Dale brought out, I do support. It seems like very sensible to include the phrasing about evidence-based practices in the treatment definition, and to also have other outcomes be a factor for the innovation. I'm not so sure about limiting to recidivism for treatment, because it seems to me that some individuals who may be served through the treatment modalities may not be folks who've already experienced extensive engagement in the criminal justice system. So I'm not sure how big a play that one is. So I don't have a problem with including it, but I would hate to have it be a requirement for any of the treatment programming, because some treatment programming could be to prevent incarceration, to take people out of the system before they find themselves in custody. So that's my comment. And my other comment is going to be about the section of the bylaws that's deleted on outcome and performance standards.
Okay, I'll get back to you on that one if we can. Tracy, you had a comment next, I think, for the definitions.
I was just going to say under treatment, I do agree with Dale that we need to have some evidence. They need to be evidence-based, or at least promising. I think that's the other language that's commonly used. So I would agree with that. I just want to be, and I know Ian's got his hand raised, and I'm hoping Karen raises her hand because they're the experts in treatment. But I think we need to be careful about, because in incapacitation, you could lock someone up for 10 years and they technically won't recidivate, but they're not going to get out and be any healthier or any better equipped to cope with circumstances that they need help coping with. So I don't think that just reducing recidivism by itself is a good definition of treatment. I think I understand, Dale, what you're saying is that it needs to address capacity in the community to, public safety and obeying the laws, et cetera. But I think we need to stick with a treatment definition that talks about improving people's skill sets or capacity to be very productive in the community versus recidivism. That's it.
And I apologize, I don't know who was next, but Chief Miller, please.
Actually, I was last.
Aaron was before me.
Oh, okay, Karen, looks like you're up. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I think I agree that we should add something in there about evidence-based or promising practices for treatment. I think that's a good call out. It's in line with what we've said all along and in terms of the outcomes we're tracking. I think, you know, when we worked on this definition and put criminogenic needs and kind of highlighted the areas that we track in terms of treatment within this definition, that was our intent. Treatment providers do not track recidivism. They don't have access to that information even. And so, and what we heard from the national experts when they presented, like Dr. Latessa and others who came to us, is that treatment's job is to address these criminogenic needs and intervene in improving people's success in terms of their relationships, their employment status, their social connectedness. And so that's what we put in here. So happy, I think I'm in full support of adding evidence-based practices or some language, promising practices, whatever. But I would not feel good about putting in recidivism here because that's not what our treatment providers track.
Ian?
Karen said a lot of what I was going to say already. But I think the other piece that I'll just add is that there's also a whole host of factors outside of what the treatment provider that's serving that person may impact their life that lead to recidivism, either while they're in treatment or post, receiving treatment from that treatment provider, that may result in them coming back to custody that has nothing to do with the treatment that we would be funding and supporting. But like everyone has said, I fully agree with adding in evidence-based or promising practices to the definition. I think it makes total sense, and it's where we've been trying to move as we go through things like the results first work and looking at our system overall.
Okay. Chief Miller.
All right. So I think I concur mostly with what the undersheriff is saying, maybe not necessarily in the treatment definition, but I'm going to bring it back to our goal number one is ensure a safe environment for all residents and visitors by reducing and preventing local crime and reducing recidivism. And nowhere in this document do I see anything about reducing recidivism. And that is certainly one of our goals. So rather than maybe in the treatment definition, include somewhere above in the proposal review process that the goals are reduce recidivism, achieve our other goals. Because that's also the purpose for innovation. Also, is to reduce recidivism as well as achieve our other goals. I think it does need to be said somewhere. That is certainly a goal.
Supervisor Saylor, do you have more on this topic?
I think Chief Miller is right on target. I think having a reference to recidivism elsewhere in the bylaws is sensible. And I think the group consensus around including evidence-based or promising practices is good. I think this is it's hard for the definitional sentence to carry the weight of all these topics. And so there are other places in the bylaws and the framework for policy that other topics can be addressed.
I have a suggestion. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Supervisor Saylor. And I totally give deference to all the treatment experts. If we would say something, would this raise issues in Karen if you said something like, striving to reduce recidivism? So that would kind of be saying not all these programs are going to reduce recidivism because some of these individuals aren't in the system, criminal justice system, but then there are others that are. Because I think sometimes we view it with a lens that all these people are in the system, and I realize they're not. They're all not. But would that not be advisable to say striving to reduce recidivism?
I wonder if we could, what if when we added in evidence-based practices, the wording was something like utilizing evidence-based or best practices known to reduce recidivism. So we're focusing on whatever curriculum the providers are using is an evidence base that's known to reduce recidivism. I'm wondering if that would be an acceptable alternative to the undersheriff or the group.
Under Sheriff Johnson.
I can agree with Karen on that, but like I said, I'm aligned with the chief and that this is our main goal is to reduce recidivism. It is, and it needs to be in there. It needs to be evidence-based. And I don't want us to get away from what our primary function is with the CCP. And so I think we need to work on something to get it in here because I think we're just like using the word likelihood. I don't like that word. You know, to me, it's just everything's a likelihood. I mean, so we need to move away from words like that and be a little bit more stringent on what we're going to propose and accept here.
Okay. Supervisor Saylor, you had other comments to make?
Thanks, Dan. I just want to ask the group what the thinking behind the deletion of the outcomes data collection topic is. I can understand if it's something about the specific call out of results-based accountability, but I'm curious why the bylaws wouldn't include reference of in some manner to outcomes and data collection and performance measurement. Seems like a pretty relevant topic. Maybe I lost track of conversation somewhere along the line. Why are we deleting that phrasing?
Don, my understanding, and maybe this is me mishearing things coming out of last CCP, was that there was a potential another work group being performed or subgroup of the CCP to work specifically on data collection performance measures. And so that was the justification for that, was that there may be more depth needed in that topic.
That makes some sense, but I think I would hate to have the topic be completely deleted from the bylaws. That's probably not the group's intention. Maybe it's that there will be a first paragraph as part of each program and proposal approved by the CCP Executive Committee. Outcomes and data collection and performance measurement will be required. Reporting out will be required. So those elements seem like they're relevant, even if the specific approach is something that a work group is going to flesh out.
Members' comments? I'll go with this one. Yeah, I think in hindsight it needs to be part of it. If that's not the ideal place for it, we need it somewhere in the document. Others? Karen?
I'm wondering if this might be the place where we can build up some of the language that the undersheriff was speaking to and Chief Miller, because one of the outcomes we would want to track would be recidivism, right? And so maybe this is a place where we highlight those high level outcomes. You know, reduced days homeless is one that we often track, or, you know, reduced days incarcerated obviously would be one for this. Obviously each of us track different outcomes, but I do think leaving it out entirely doesn't make good sense.
Yeah, I think that I agree, Karen, that this would be a good place to address some of the issues that came up in the earlier conversation. I agree.
All right, at this point, I'll open it up to public comment, and I also want to open it up to public comment on agenda item number 7 as well, because I unfortunately failed to open that up for public comment. So we'll take public comment on both items. Julie, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do. We have Robert Canning.
Go ahead, Mr. Canning.
Thank you, members. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to make sure you can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I just want to thank Karen for her comments about the SIM. I would recommend, at least from a public viewpoint, that the CCP don't take complete ownership of the SIM, but spread it around to the different departments, which have sometimes more public input. So for instance, the mental health board may have input that would be very useful. So that's my comment on that item, number 7, I think it was. On number 8, I would agree with Supervisor Saylor and Karen that there should be a section on outcomes. I would also suggest that that there be some language about program evaluation. It's not just the outcomes, but then how is the program, is it effective or not? And that involves being able to evaluate a program in order to determine whether you want to continue to fund it and whether it's doing any good in the community. Also, here's another language piece that sometimes is used in these kinds of statements. Not only is it evident or things evidence-based, but they can also be evidence-informed, and promising is also a great word. So thank you very much for your work.
Are there additional public members wishing to speak?
Yes, we have Seska Wright.
Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
Thank you. It's Francesca Wright. And Robert raised some of the points I was going to speak to. Usually, in order to get desired outcomes, it's more than a single intervention that creates success. So I'm very encouraged by the unilateral support for tracking outcomes. But my suggestion is that the entire CCP focus on their priority outcomes, and some programs can contribute to that. And that would especially apply to anything that is preventive. And secondly, having a menu of indicators that are important is something that it sounds like each of you have struggled with for your individual programs, but it may be helpful to bring it to the entire group and get agreement about really what is your mission? What are you trying to achieve? How would you know you were successful? What would it look like? How could it be counted? So these are all moving in a great direction, and thank you for focusing on impact, not just intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
We have LT.
Go ahead.
She just needs to mute herself.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I could for a moment, but not now.
I'm not sure what's happening here. She needs to unmute herself.
Okay, I got muted again. I apologize.
We can hear you now.
Oh, great. Hi, hello, staff and county supervisors and all the departments present. I just wanted to commend the work that all of you guys are doing, and it's just really great to see interest in changing the criminal justice system in Yolo County. And I just wanted to thank Supervisor Saylor for noticing that discrepancy. Omitting the data and outcomes wouldn't be a wise move, I guess, how to say it politely. I do believe that it is very difficult to figure out where you're going if you don't know where you're coming from. And so obtaining that information is vital to any programs and also to determining budget funding for future programs. And like Robert Canning had said about program evaluation, Also, I wanted to highlight what Tracy had said about rollover in the budget. Those are good recommendations because it is important to make sure that you have the money available in case there's a hardship, especially since we are going through the pandemic and funding is often unsecure. So having that money without having to feel the priority to spend it every year or have it taken away, that's important as well. But just really, again, going back to what Supervisor Saylor and Karen said about evaluating the outcomes being important, having that in there is really vital. So if you guys could look at that again and really think about putting that in there. And lastly, I wasn't present for all of item 7, but the tail end of what I did understand, the agenda item may have been about input from the mental health community and organizations that are working directly with stakeholders and clients. Their voice, even though they might not have a vote anymore because the bylaws were amended, their voice is also very important. And including them in the conversation, I wouldn't see personally, especially for mental health program that's successful without having community input involved and organizations that deal directly with that, the groups. So hopefully you guys rethink taking that paragraph out, but if not, then just be inclusive as possible, please. This is important to have their opinion in as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, are there others?
I have no additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to the CCP for any additional comments or questions. Not seeing any. It appears that we're not ready for publication of the bylaws. So Eric, I'm thinking we'll have to return. We'll have to put some more effort into it and clarify some of these questions and concerns and add to it and then bring it back to the group. I don't know if there's anything you want to add or to that, Eric?
Yes, if the group doesn't mind, maybe I'll just provide a quick recap of what I captured, and then I will have to go back and rewatch this video, which is being recorded, to make sure that everything is captured appropriately. But we had some basic language changes. We had the definition language that we discussed. So I think there's some work that needs to be put into the definition language. The language that Jonathan mentioned, the language related to outcomes. And what I will note about that is as Chad did mention, the group actually had discussed forming an ad hoc for this purpose. And so I anticipate in the future that we will actually be having a much more in-depth discussion about outcomes. We will not be removing them. So I just want to make that very clear that the CCP and staff are very focused about that. And then also a note about the rollover language and then any other miscellaneous language that I might have missed, but will include as staff continues with this process. So I think the plan then would that barring any other special CCP meetings, we would return on October 11th for the next regularly scheduled CCP meeting with this bylaws language. And I just want to check in with County Council that makes sense in terms of how bylaws operate or if there's any other steps we need to take.
I think that makes sense.
Thanks.
Thank you, which brings us to agenda item number 9. Consider CCP budget proposals and take any action as needed. Does have my name on it, but I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Sure. So once again, hi everyone, Eric Will, CCP analyst. And so this is the other budget item that we have on our docket for today. And so as noted in the CCP's agenda packet, there were several proposals that were brought forth to the CCP's attention. And I actually contacted and reached out to anyone who provided a proposal and asked if they wouldn't mind just giving a very brief overview at the beginning of this item to the group, just so that we're all on the same page. And I believe we have most folks in this meeting right now who did provide proposals. And so I think the plan for right now would just be to run very quickly through these. If that's acceptable to the group, I thought it would be helpful to just provide a very brief overview of what the proposal is, and then to field questions before we got into the discussion of the overall proposals as a whole, and then any actions that might be considered at this time. So I'm just going to go down the list of associated proposals, and then we'll just need to move over folks into panelists just very quickly, and I can take care of that, Julie. So the first is the request for funding to hire a victim advocate for the Yellow Restorative Justice Partnership. And I don't know if Laura, if you would like to present on that, or if you would. Okay, I will move over the folks who just raised their hands. Okay, great. If you could just give a very brief overview, thank you so much. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Nicole Kirkaldy. I'm the program coordinator for the Restorative Justice Partnership, and presenting on behalf of RJP as well as the Victim Services Unit. So our request is for a full-time advocate for our program. Our program resolves criminal cases through a restorative justice process that brings in members of the community as well as any direct victims involved in these cases to meet with participants, to discuss what happened, and to reach agreements that are typically more healing and more transformative than some of what we see coming out of the traditional criminal court system. Currently, we've handled over 2,000 cases through this process, and over 400 have involved direct victims. Those have all been managed by our AB 109 advocate in the DA's office, who also has their own unique caseload under AB 109 of over 2,200 cases. And that's in the timeline that since they've been in operation. So since 2014, that position's been filled. RJP, formerly Neighborhood Court, has been in operation since 2013. And so all of these cases have been handled by our advocate. It started with a few a year, grew to around 50 a year. And in the year 2019 to 2020, that number was over 150. So we've seen RJP as one of the primary innovative options through the DA's office for restorative processes. And we see that this caseload has gotten more complex. The severity of cases handled has increased. We've seen great recidivism outcomes. We're a grant-funded program, so we're always tracking results. But the ability of the AB 109 advocate to handle this caseload with the attention to detail and care that's needed, in addition to their own existing caseload, it's grown to be more of a challenge. And so it's really become necessary to have a full-time position dedicated specifically to this focus, which aligns with the goal of restorative justice and rehabilitation that CCP supports.
Thank you. And Chair, did you want to field questions now, or just go through the brief overviews really quickly and then have folks field any questions?
I think if we just go through them quickly, then we'll circle back and go through specific questions per program.
Great. Thank you. So next we will move over to the Sheriff's Office. And so under Sheriff Johnson, did you have a representative you wanted, or would you like to speak to this?
Shannon Wolf will be speaking today on behalf of the Sheriff's Office.
Perfect. I'll move her over.
Thank you, Eric.
Great, here I am. Hi, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shan Wolf, and I'm the Planning and Research Manager for the Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office put in 2 treatment dollar proposals. The first in your packet is for an in-custody program manager. The Sheriff's Office is asking for just under $100,000 in the first year to be leveraged with $50,000 of general fund monies already approved in the recommended budget to fund 1 full-time position of an in-custody program manager. The CCP Strategic Plan Goal 3, Objective 3A states to expand the use and availability of evidence-based in-custody programming to offenders. The Sheriff's Office wants to do that in the new programming space in Monroe and shortly in the additional programming space in Lineberger. However, determining what programming not only meets the needs of the ever-changing inmate population and is also evidence-based and effective in reducing recidivism, as well as collecting performance measures and matrix, and building partnerships with the county partners and community stakeholders, and identifying possible funding sources and holding providers accountable for the services is a full-time job that is beyond the current capacity or capabilities of current correctional staff. In order for the Sheriff's Office to begin effectively and successfully expanding in-custody programming, a program manager must be in place. We believe this is the fundamental first step, which will allow for us to lay groundwork and support behind a comprehensive in-custody programming program. And the second proposal from the Sheriff's Office is to expand the in-custody medicated assisted treatment or MAT program with an out-of-custody support piece. The Sheriff's Office is requesting just over $462,000 annually for the program. And this proposal was originally an RSAT grant request that the Sheriff's Office submitted to BSCC in partnership with HHSA, the CAO's office, CFMG or WellPath, the in-custody medical mental health provider, and Communicare. Unfortunately, the grant was not awarded. However, the need for the program remains strong. Monies would allow the MAT program to expand to 15 program participants in custody at one time and capped at 20 per month. As a part of the MAT Learning Collaborative, data was collected that clearly demonstrates that there is still a need for expanded MAT services in jail. The annual budget consists of 1 full-time correctional officer to provide security during the administration of medication and transportation to treatment, and as well as funding to WellPath for staffing, medication, and drug screening and supplies, and funding to Communicare, which will provide the outpatient portion. When program participants are released from custody, Communicare will continue to distribute and supervise medication, conduct counseling, and any other treatment options available. And those are the Sheriff's Office 2 proposals.
Dan, I have to butt in. I'm just very impressed, Bashan, with your grasp of acronyms, but I'm very frightened that I actually understood what all of them are. And it begins to worry me a little bit that you're—
I'm telling you, when I first started here and I was new to law enforcement and IT, I had like a page, 2 pages of acronyms to start to memorize.
Thank you, Ms. Shan.
Thank you.
We'll move over next to probation. Chief, did you want Laura to speak to this?
Laura's going to present, yes.
Hi, everybody. Laura Litticoat, Fiscal Administrative Officer, Yolo County Probation. Yolo County Probation has put together 2 proposals. The first is for treatment dollars, approximately $40,000 for vocational development services. Historically, the probation department has funded vocational services from a single vendor out of its own operational budget. At this time, we'd like to request $40,000 in order to leverage existing partnerships with HHSA's Workforce Investment Board to revamp the Vocational Development Services Program. We believe this partnership will assist the department in planning and ultimately expanding the array of vocational services provided to meet client needs and interests. The second proposal that the department has presented is a request for administration funds to provide dedicated fiscal support to the CCP. That would be provided by my position, essentially. What I would be doing for the CCP would be putting together those fiscal action items in the proposed budget policies document, i.e. putting together your quarterly reports, facilitating any kind of necessary reimbursement transfers, and working with DFS on annual revenue projections and revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And I don't think I see Kara here, but is there a representative for the next proposal, which is increasing participation in the Restorative Justice Partnership Program? I believe she had to leave at 2:15. So we have the proposal, and if there are questions, we can do follow-up if needed on that. We'll move over to the next proposal then, which is treatment investments, which I will ask Karen if you would like to present anything on this.
Thanks, Eric. I will say that I submitted these proposals several months ago and was waiting to see how this process fleshed out before I presented them. And so the treatment coordinator that's included in my proposal is duplicative of what the Sheriff's Department has included in theirs. So I would respectfully remove my request because they've already included it in theirs. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Crisis Now, and then the other two items that I have, which are in custody substance use disorder treatment, separate from medication assisted treatment, and the discharge planner position. The Crisis Now is the biggest ask. Many of you have already heard about Crisis Now, but I'll give a broad overview. Crisis Now is a new way of looking at our crisis continuum in Yolo County. We are approaching several different pieces of funding, state, federal, the cities, and CCP to support the project. The project essentially has three key components. There's a 24/7 crisis and access line, which HHSA will continue to fund. The second piece of the model are the co-responders that we have, or crisis response teams within our community. That cost is shared currently through the cities, CCP and HHSA. And then the third component, which is what we're asking the CCP to fund using treatment dollars, is this 24/7 crisis receiving center / sobering center. The reason we're asking for CCP is because it's aligned with many of our strategic plan items. What we know is that almost 70% of our individuals booked into Yolo County Jail are released within 3 days. Most of those are for crimes related to substance abuse. And so having a sobering center is, we've heard from our law enforcement partners loud and clear that having a sobering center would take care of many of those types of calls. We also know that 50% of the folks that end up in our hospitals on 5150 holds are released in less than 24 hours back to the community. They never go to an inpatient unit. And 50% of those that do go to inpatient unit are released within 3 days, meaning they probably don't need to be on a 5150 hold. So this crisis receiving center / sobering center would allow us to divert individuals from custody and give them the right level of care for either mental health or substance use related issues. And so that's one of the asks. The other ask is for in custody substance use disorder treatment. Super excited about the MAT proposal. Sad we didn't get the grant we applied for, but lucky it was all written up. But there are other individuals in custody who would benefit from substance use disorder treatment. We know that several of our folks that sit in custody for longer than 30 days have substance use disorders and would benefit from treatment while they're in custody. And so we've recommended this $250,000 amount to support those services. We would propose using SCOE as the vendor to oversee those in custody services. And then finally was the discharge planner position. We saw that as separate from the treatment coordinator because we saw this person as the key individual as folks were getting close to discharge to help link them up with the needed resources within the community, which is in line with the later intercepts on the sequential intercept map, and obviously with our CCP strategic plan. I'm done talking now.
Thank you, Karen. And then finally, we have a request from the City of Woodland for advanced peace. And so I will have Chief Caff join us.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, everybody, Chief Caff here. So our request is in regards to the Advanced Peace Program that the City of Woodland recently began a chapter just in the past few months. Advanced Peace is a gun violence reduction strategy. They are evidence-based. UC Berkeley studies each of the sites where Advanced Peace is operating each year. And they have strict outcome measurements that they report on every year. But so what this program does is focuses on cyclical gun violence. Look, at the end of the day, I just want shootings to stop. And I really don't care how they stop. We will continue our traditional law enforcement model, working with the partners, many of you who are on this call. But in addition, the city is going down this road, and we are seeking funding because the initial proposal we received was for the full package of a completely self-sufficient chapter here in Woodland. That was going to be $440,000 a year. Unfortunately, that was more than the city could afford initially on our own. So we asked them to scale it down a little bit. And the city was able to get 2 neighborhood change agents and 1 part-time administrative person for about $200,000 a year. What we are coming to the CCP for is the funding of the rest of that project, which is a full-time field coordinator, which will increase our ability to connect with people who are actively in the cyclical gun violence, as well as part-time employment assistance from an employment specialist case manager, and then most importantly, a mental health clinician and administrative specialist so that we can give the full wraparound services to those folks that are involved in gun violence. I think all of you are aware that we, like pretty much every jurisdiction across the nation, has seen an uptick in gun violence. And this is a way that, I'm coming to you as the head law enforcement official here in the city, but I fully support this. This is not a law enforcement program, but I believe in it so much that that's why I'm coming forward to this. We've got to do something different. And you can take a look at the UC Berkeley studies for each of the jurisdictions and see the outcomes. Richmond had a 66% decrease in gun violence over the period of 7 years. And so my hope is that in time, we are going to see that same benefit here, but really it serves those people that are in the gun violence lifestyle. And that's all I got, Eric.
Thank you, Chief. And we do have, actually, Nicole is able to speak to the increasing participation in the Restorative Justice Partnership Program. So I will kick it over to her for just a moment. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. So I'm speaking as a partner with the YOLO Conflict Resolution Center, YCRC, and they have really been striving to make sure that we are fully aligned with the principles of restorative justice in enacting our programming. One of the aspects of concern is how we first interact with potential participants. So how do we first contact defendants, people coming into the court system who are eligible for this alternative program? Sometimes when that first contact is coming from the district attorney's office, there's some resistance or hesitation due to lack of trust, due to prior beliefs. And so our understanding is that by working more closely with our partners to allow them to handle that engagement, we can make sure that we're not missing people who would be interested in this programming, who would benefit from this programming, but are essentially kind of scared away because of their concerns otherwise. By having somebody kind of outside of the system make that first contact, they can overcome some of those barriers and make sure that we're offering this in an equitable way, in a way that kind of overcomes some of the challenges that we've all grown more familiar with as a nation and as a community, with making sure that justice is applied equitably across racial barriers, across economic levels, and that people are kind of able to access the benefits equally. And so our goal is to have YCRC spearhead that by having staff to do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking to that on the spot. I appreciate that. So at this time, we've heard all of the proposals, and it would seem that the most reasonable way to do this would be to tackle questions related to each proposal in order so that we don't have a free-for-all on all 8 proposals. And so I would move to move through the proposals, beginning it with the first and moving through the 8th, if that makes sense, Chair.
Supervisor Saylor, you had your hand up. I don't know if it's specific to that.
I have a couple questions on individual proposals, but my first question has to do with the overall availability of funding. I assume these proposals are being submitted for consideration for 21, 22. And if that's the case, what's the amount of funds that are available for allocation? And what's the timeline for making the decision? Just general framework questions.
So I will defer to Laura if she would like to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in attachment D, after the operating budget for the CCP, there is a summary of the treatment proposals. With regards to the treatment allocation, there's approximately $2.88 million available. If items that have already been approved have historically been approved and new requests were all to be funded, and we do know that there is one revision as Karen has retracted one of her requests as the sheriff submitted for it as well. There are ample treatment dollars available. It would leave treatment with a small surplus of $145,000. Likewise, in the innovation category, there's approximately $1 million available. If all previously approved and requested funding proposals were funded, there would be an available surplus of $385,000 available. With regards to the administration category, there is $230,000 available, and the historically approved portion of the CAO analyst and the requested fiscal support would leave an available surplus of $64,000. There is ample funding to fund all proposals this year. However, we do know based on current CCP projections that there will be a reduction in revenue next year.
And this is Jonathan for Supervisor Saylor. Yeah, so in the proposals, one of the questions was for what period of time. So many of these are ongoing, and some of them are not ongoing, or for a period of 3 years or maybe even 1 year.
Okay, so how is that issue addressed in the tables that Laura was just referring us to?
Julie, would you be able to pull up that page for everybody to look at? And then Laura, if you can help walk us through it.
Maybe just for treatment, maybe that's a key one just to understand.
Can you tell me, Eric, what page it's on? So I'm not just hunting.
Keep scrolling up, Julie.
Okay.
Right there.
Right here. Okay. Thank you.
So technically going into next fiscal year's anticipated treatment allocation, we would be running a deficit if all approved programs this year were to continue into next year. However, part of the CCP budget policies that are being discussed would be a carry forward of previous year allocations in specific allocation areas, i.e. treatment dollars that weren't spent in the previous year could carry forward into the next fiscal year. I have run some preliminary projections on treatment expenses in the 2021 fiscal year. So there would be a sizable carry forward in treatment dollars available from 2021 to 21-22. So that may in future years, as the public defender has mentioned, help soothe that shortfall moving forward as there would be available fund balance. Additionally, I would anticipate that there would be savings available in the 21-22 fiscal year as some of these programs aren't up, they're not active, expenses could be lower. There would be savings during the FTE recruitment process that would leave funding into the next year, I believe, available to carry programming forward if all proposals were adopted. Likewise, revenue projections from the state are always subject to change. So there is some volatility there, I realize. But again, we would be assessing that in my role as fiscal support to the CCP on a continuous basis.
Thank you, Laura. I have just two more questions before we go to the individual programs. The first one is the reserve target of 10%. How's that reflected in this? And when we say available to, I guess we're assuming that all of the funding, all of the requests can be funded. There's a little bit left. How does the 10% target fare if all these programs are funded?
Dan, would you like me to step in?
I would just assume you would, but yes, please.
So the budget ad hoc committee had been working on a goal of a 5% reserve, which they had been funding from the overall CCP fund balance that's available. So Julie, if you were to scroll up one page, I believe, thank you very much, you would see that down towards the bottom, that $577,000. Now, again, Chad's advising now a 10% reserve, and this is a 5% reserve. However, we would be able to fund a 5%, possibly a 10%, with available CCP fund balance currently.
Okay, so the fund balance at the bottom of that column of the bottom row on this page shows that some of that fund balance would be allocated for the items above that line.
Correct.
You're saying that there's sufficient funds to rejigger it to get 10%.
It does appear that way right now, sir. Yes.
Okay, and my last question is the comment that all the proposals could be funded. Is this addressing piece, Woodland Police Department proposal, is that included in this as well, or is that?
It is, sir. Yes.
Where is that one? That's not in the.
That is in the innovation category, 2 pages down.
Advanced piece. Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you for your patience. I appreciate it. Look forward to the questions on the program.
Chief Miller, do you have general questions before we get into specific ones?
Yeah, I do. First of all, this exceeds my expectations of what we were going to get, which I'm actually thrilled. We talked about this in the budget ad hoc committee. Want to draw our attention back to that attachment C, and that we did have a time cap of February as written. So even when we have these excess funds, if there's additional programs that we want to consider, will there be the option to consider those programs? And something to consider in that rewrite of attachment C. Does that make sense?
So maybe I'll clarify just to make sure I understand as staff. And so it would be that there's the possibility for programs to be received by the CCP Executive Committee after this meeting currently.
Yeah, but in the bylaws, will that be addressed that, or is it February a drop dead date? And nothing will be considered after that? Because as it's written, it sounds like it's drop dead date.
It strikes me that that's for the budget preparation for the 22-23 year. That would be your normal process. But this seems to me this year you're doing kind of catch up with your current year budget. I don't know if that's right, but that's the way it seems.
Understood. I'm just saying, so even in next fiscal year, after February, are we not receiving any other proposals? Even if there's money left in those funds?
Chief Miller, I do believe that if there were funding available, as in if you were to approve all the current requests for innovation as is currently on the screen, you would have $385,000 available to you. My understanding, though it's not explicitly stated in the budget principles, and again, I wouldn't want to speak for Chad, but I do believe that could be included, that allocation or appropriation of existing or available funding could be done at a meeting of the CCP. And then fiscal support would simply help the department in budgeting for that, whether that requires board action or not.
Yeah, it seems to me if something comes up throughout the year that fits the CCP's plans, we should be able at any time of the year to bring it forward. Doesn't mean it'll get approved right then, obviously, but it does seem like we should be able to move it forward at any time throughout the year if it comes up. Just my thoughts, entertain other thoughts on it.
This is Jonathan, I agree.
Okay, Eric, we'll go down the list again, starting with the first proposal, and we'll have specific questions per proposal.
Can I ask a question, Dan? It gets kind of confusing to do these piecemeal. Are we going to take one and have more discussion and then vote? Or are we going to go back and forth and back and forth?
That's a good question, Jonathan. What does the group think, or suggestions? There's no real great way to do it. I'm trying to make it as open as possible for all of them. We kind of arbitrarily rank, not, just put them in an arbitrary order. We did not rank them. And so just trying to give everybody a fair shot at their proposal. But obviously I'm open to suggestions if others have them.
This is Karen. I feel like we definitely should have separate action items for treatment versus innovation funding. I'm not sure about action items, if we have to do it by each individual request, but if that may be required, it does complicate it a little bit to go through each one individually for comments, and not if we are not going to vote on them.
I think we do need to go through each request within each category separately. So I agree with you, Karen.
I think it would be helpful, back to the outcome data and performance measures, and having that, especially for all these proposals, because they all make some assumptions about the value of the effort, and it would be good to know how they'd be measured. You're going to have to take a look at them in years to come. So I'm curious how we're going to address that topic for each of these proposals, and for them all overall.
So, Supervisor Saylor, I think that the proposals all have how each proposal is going to measure outcomes. So that's all in there. I suppose there could be follow-up questions, but every single proposal, based on what Eric had requested, be included in the proposals. They all have how they're going to measure outcomes.
Yeah, I'm seeing them, Jonathan, but I don't know how that's going to be tracked. So is that just a line on a page of some words on a page, or is there something going to actually happen to gather the data and evaluate it? A fair point.
Yes, it is fair.
If I might, I believe part of the process would be that ad hoc that was requested at the previous CCP meeting, that they would be working through that specific process. So I understand that today we'd be maybe getting a little ahead of that process, but that it would be built in the coming months by that ad hoc, if that was my understanding from the previous meeting.
Yeah, some of them have a little bit more than others, so it'd be good to let's just keep that in our consciousness as we proceed.
Tracy?
I'm just going to say, at the last meeting, we established that we were going to have an ad hoc. We haven't actually picked the membership yet, but I can tell you in the ad hoc budget committee, we anticipated following the county protocol, which would be quarterly monitors, mid-year monitor, third quarter monitor, et cetera, for funding, and as well as data collection, which is one of the reasons why we were going to be relying so heavily on the CAO analyst and the fiscal administrator to help in the collection efforts. What we haven't done yet is asked everyone to figure out what the forms look like. Are we using the RBA form? What are we going to be using? So we are a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I don't think we can help it right now. But we do want to set something that's pretty detailed. I had a quick question, Karen. The discharge planner, that's an FTE that resides where? Is that a probation officer?
What the sheriff and I had discussed is that it would be a county employee. We didn't land on whether it would be an HHSA employee or a sheriff's department employee, but that it would be a county employee, you know, versus WellPath. We didn't talk about that being a probation officer. In my mind, it's more of a social worker type. And that I believe that was the sheriff's understanding as well.
Hey, Karen, don't we?
I
I'm
thought
sorry.
probation has a
Yes.
discharge planner.
That's what I was going to say. I thought there was a social worker in the jail. Yeah.
I think the individual that's currently in the jail does not meet what the discharge planning efforts that we were envisioning with this proposal in terms of linking to community-based services at discharge or ensuring that those, you know, behavioral health needs were met prior to discharge.
What is that? Because she's a social worker. What does she do? Because I mean, in my experiences with mental health court and addiction intervention court, I thought that's exactly what she was doing.
She doesn't work for me, so that it might be a better question for someone else. I think it bears to reason that we would need more than one, even if she is doing that, because it's a pretty intensive thing to do for people as they're just, you know, as they're getting ready to discharge, to link them with the different services.
So one of my questions, and you covered this, Karen, you said you didn't need that other position, is it seemed like, I don't know how much coordination there was between probation and the sheriff and HHSA, because I felt like, and I'll talk about it a little later, but I felt like there's like some duplication of efforts, you know, and I know you took out that one position, but that's what I was curious about. So, but you're saying you think one social worker isn't enough.
Well, what we know is that there are people being discharged from custody that are not being linked to community-based services. That continues to be a gap. So we believe there's the need for an additional social worker to assist with discharge planning.
I had a general, Chief Fruitnick.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I did a little Excel spreadsheet for myself. We are overextending ourselves under treatment if we follow every recommendation. Well, let me back up. I don't have a problem with anybody's ask. And I think there's enough money to approve them all. But what I would like to do, and I'm asking Karen if we can do this, can we put crisis now under innovation? Because then we're not setting up an infrastructure that relies on fund balances, and we don't have to cross our fingers every year that we're going to have extra money to pay for these things. And what we're going to be doing instead, since advanced piece is only for 2 years, we're going to be creating structurally something that we can actually continue to follow, even if we have downturns in our allocations. Not if they're severe downturns, but if we have modest downturns. And we can accomplish that if we move crisis now down to innovation.
Have no objection to whether it's an innovation or treatment.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. But I mean, I can share my Excel spreadsheet if anyone's interested. But if you take out the treatment coordinator, which is redundant to the sheriff's request, and you include everything else, we're not setting ourselves up for failure. And that's mostly what I'm concerned about, because none of these are one-time funds except for advanced piece, which is a 2-year fund. Everybody else is ongoing. So every year we're talking about people, for the most part, people whose livelihood depend on our decisions today. And I want to make sure that we're not just coming up with a 1 or 2 year plan, but a sustainable plan over the years.
Those are all good points, Tracy. Others with general questions about the process or all right, Eric?
I just wanted to make a quick note that we have about 15 minutes remaining in this meeting as scheduled. So I just wanted to be the timekeeper. And so I think, you know, it seems like there might be some questions about individual proposals. And so I would just still recommend starting with the first and going through and then determining the voting process, if that's okay. So were there any questions about the first proposal regarding the victim advocate for Yellow Restorative Justice Partnership? Seeing none, How about the sheriff, the in-custody program manager? Or medication-assisted treatment?
Yeah, I have a question on the medicated assisted treatment. I'm trying to, so Karen had said that the in-custody sub treatment, 250,000 would go beyond MAT, but I'm sure part of that, or it seems like part of that would be MAT, would be covered by MAT. I guess that's my question. Taking out MAT, which I guess is all people addicted to heroin and maybe some other narcotics, and that's, you know, quite a few, it seems. Is there a duplication there? And that's a question for the sheriff and for Karen or for Ian.
My perspective, there's no duplication. Ian was involved with the sheriff's department in writing the grant, and so he can probably speak to some of those specifics.
Yeah, I think in terms of I agree, there's no duplication. I think there's a large need for substance use disorder treatment, regardless, and medication-assisted treatment in custody. And I think what we saw, to Michan's point in her presentation earlier, what we saw in the 18 months Matt Learning Collaborative we've done so far is there's more need in custody than we can currently meet for those that are struggling with opioid use or substance use. And that we need to improve the reentry coordination for those folks post-release to ensure that they connect with our out-of-custody MAT providers to continue the medication that started. So sometimes it looks like folks that are on, you know, methadone or some of their substance, some of their medication-assisted treatment when they come into custody, and we're looking to continue that. Sometimes it's folks that are going through withdrawal protocols, and we need to get them induced on medication. And sometimes it's folks that have been in custody for a little while. They were using heavily on the outside, and they want to ensure that they don't relapse when they get released. And so they connect to medication-assisted treatment prior to their release.
And I would add, Ian, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also circumstances where not everyone is going to want to participate in medicated assisted treatment. And so there needs to be another type of substance abuse treatment in place in custody that's not MAT.
Agreed.
Thanks. So Dale or Michan, in terms of the outcome measures for this, I see you are looking at jail bed days. What about recidivism, arrests? Is that something you're going to look at too?
It's something that we want to, but like Karen had mentioned earlier, recidivism is kind of a hard thing to track, but it is something that we can try to track and include and see if they've come back in or if they rebooked.
I mean, you can track arrests in the county. I think what Karen was saying is many of the population she was talking about are not criminally justice involved, but everyone we're talking about in this proposal is criminally justice involved. So, I mean, I kind of see how we do it in mental health court, and HHSA actually does the stats, and they look, you know, they're criminally justice involved, and they look at jail bed days, hospital bed days, which isn't something you would look at, but also arrests.
Mm-hmm. Well, then that's yeah, it's definitely something that we can track if we need to. Yeah.
Jonathan, if I could add to that, whenever I see something that says has anything to do with substance abuse treatment, I'm interested in understanding what the treatment objectives are and what the treatment related outcomes and performance measures are. So it's yes, it'd be great if people don't return to jail, but they might have some other issues like they die or they continue to be cleverly continuing their substance abuse challenges. So I guess I'm interested in having some kind of substance use treatment or mental health, behavioral health treatment outcomes in addition to the criminal justice system outcomes, because we're trying to change people's lives and have them not come back. We ought to be tracking what happens with them on that scale as well.
Karen?
I was just going to point out for the substance use disorder treatment that we're proposing, and this could easily be tracked for the MAT program as well. If you look at pages 49 through 51, those are the same substance use disorder outcomes that we track for all of our substance use disorder treatment that's funded through CCP. And on the PM3s, you'll notice that we actually do track reduction in days incarcerated during treatment. This is less relevant for the in custody folks, and then post-treatment after they've completed treatment. So in addition to those other kind of quality of life metrics that you're referring to, Supervisor Saylor.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think Supervisor Saylor, you make a really good point about for the medication-assisted treatment piece, that one of the things we know for folks that struggle with opioid or alcohol use that need medication-assisted treatment is those first couple of weeks post-custody is the most dangerous for them. That's when we see the most overdose deaths, because often folks that are not connected to substance use treatment or medication-assisted treatment appropriately go back to utilizing the same amount of substance they were using pre-custody, and their tolerance has gone way down. And so it's one of the reasons why we wanted to put in that proposal also the percentage that are successfully linked to post-custody treatment to ensure that they continue whatever gains they've made while they've been participating in the in-custody portion of it.
Okay, Eric, you want to bring us to the next one?
Yes, so that was comments on the sheriff's programs. Any comments or questions on the probation department proposals for vocational development services or CCP fiscal support? Okay, moving forward to the increasing participation in the Restorative Justice Partnership Program. Seeing none. Treatment investments, I know we had a couple of questions previously, but opportunity for any final questions about that from the group.
What is this? What proposal are you talking about, Eric?
So this would be the Health and Human Services, so Crisis Now.
I have just a couple quick questions. Karen, you had said the co-responders at the agencies are split between the agencies and HHSA. Isn't the split between the agencies and the Mental Health Services Act dollars?
Yeah, those are administered through HHSA.
But it's Mental Health Services Act dollars?
Yes.
So I'm looking at the substance use treatment page, and so it talks a lot about outpatient treatment, and maybe is the funding. I thought the funding was all in custody and then assisting them when they leave the jail. But I'm looking at this and it talks a lot about under program information. A lot of it is about outpatient treatment.
Oh, are you specifically looking at the RBA, Jonathan? Is that what you're referring to? The results, the outcome measures?
No, I'm looking at the page. It's a nice table that starts at the top, substance use treatment, and the first.
Yeah, the green one.
Mine's in the.
Oh, I think what you're looking at is our results-based accountability framework that we use for the other CCP funded substance use disorder treatment services. We wanted to provide you with especially those PM3s, which are the page 51. If you go down just a couple of pages past that first page, which are the outcomes we would track for the in-custody services. You're right that the first page is referring to our outpatient services, but we're proposing to use these same outcome metrics for the in-custody services.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep.
I love the Crisis Now. It's great.
Thank you. That will also have MHSA funding attached to it as well. So there's quite a few funding streams attached.
Quite a lot of money it's going to cost, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question about the discharge planner. Under Sheriff Johnson, do you plan on keeping the the social worker and having the discharge planner, so you'll have both positions, right?
Yeah, currently that's what it's up to, but we don't have to have the discharge planner.
I don't, if you need it, I'm fine. I just want to make sure you have both. Because what I heard Karen say is that your need is that you do need that, or she thinks you need that.
Well, the need is there, but again, it doesn't have to fall under us.
Oh, I see what you're saying. But I guess my question is, you're keeping your jail social worker though.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay, and then finally, last but not least, the City of Woodlands Advance Peace Request. Any questions, comments on this?
Just one question for the chief. There was a handout and I was asking Eric because it wasn't included and we got it just a few minutes before this started. So it references a handout. And I was really interested in that. I think that was maybe the Berkeley study. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Chief?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the Berkeley study. Included is the one from Stockton, the most recent one. It was just released earlier this year in January. But it does go to some of the comments that were made about some of the other, the metrics involved in some of the other projects. But this does go into that as well. And it's one of the reasons why I really support this is, folks outside of law enforcement that are doing all of this work and they're the ones studying it. So I believe that's going to go a long way towards building credibility in the community with this program. At the end of the day, they're looking at the number of participants that complete the program, how many of the participants have new gun charges or arrests, how many social services that were received by the participants, the percentage of life map milestones reached, because they work through, it's not just about stop shooting. It's about how do we have a transformation in these people's lives, everything from simple tasks like having an ID and a driver's license to how do you fill out a job application, how do you get a job, getting a job, keeping a job, getting a car, getting car insurance, all those basic life map skills. And then the number of the fellows is what they're referred to as when they're in the program, the people that we are outreaching, they will be outreaching to, the number of internships that they're able to complete, and then the number of participants injured or deceased from gunfire. Because again, this is prior shooters that have had a transformation, typically while in custody, are now, they have a history of being back in the community and becoming high functioning. They're the ones that are going to be employed or are employed. They've already hired one and they're working on hiring the second right now for Woodland to do the outreach. And then those people make the connections, build through daily contact relationships so that they can get connected to the rest of these services.
Thanks.
Supervisor Saylor, and then I'll move to public comment after that.
Well, Dan, I just want to tell you all how impressed I am with the quality of all these proposals, and in particular, all of them. And I just want to comment in particular on the City of Woodlands Advanced Peace proposal. Several years ago, the police chiefs were each authorized a certain amount of funding under CCP, and it really was, we couldn't tell what had happened as a result of that spending. This is a very different proposal. It's really right on target. I'm just excited that the chief has brought this forward, and it's got such a partnership of support from the City of Woodland, Rise Incorporated, Woodland community, and I'm just really impressed that it came to this group. Really hope for its success and look forward to hearing more about it in the time to come.
Thank you, Supervisor Saylor.
Thank you. We'll move it to public comment. Julie, do we have any public comment?
Francesca Wright.
Go ahead.
Thank Thank you, Julie. You got it. So yes, this is very encouraging to see these proposals and see this direction. It's been what we've been looking for from the CCP. I was a bit alarmed about the assumption that all of these would be ongoing except the one in Woodland, because again, if you're going to be evaluating programs, you'll be wanting to adjust them. And some of these might not be worthy to keep going. And I'm always cautious that there isn't a time to pause and review and take heed and decide which ones are getting the results that you're intending. I'm assuming all of these were received by April 23rd. It was a very small window of time, and I appreciate Chief Miller's comment. What if there's other fabulous proposals that come forward and we tie all our resources up with these? I was also had questions about the victim advocate piece, because in previous budgets, we have seen a number of victim advocates already funded in the DA's office. And it just seems like it's a different service than restorative justice as it was portrayed. And it's not clear whether this is going to supplement or supplant those that are already funded from other sources. The MAT program is so exciting to have substance use treatment in our jail, which has been totally absent. I would be much comforted if it's crystal clear that this is for inmates already in our jail and not to be used to fund AB 1542's proposal. Lastly, the Crisis Now is a really good first step. I still would like to see resources go to models like the CAHOOTS model in Eugene, Oregon, that doesn't require an armed co-responder. I think we can do better than that. But I think this is a good first approach, and I certainly hope that moving forward, the CCP looks at how Crisis Now is meeting the needs, and if it's always essential to have a police officer attend and show up for the calls that the Crisis Now will respond to. Again, thanks for investing in innovation and treatment. This population needs, the system needs a lot of innovation, and this population can certainly benefit from treatment. So thank you for making that commitment.
Okay, Julie, other public comment?
Robert Canning.
Go ahead.
Thank you again, members. I want to echo everything that Jessica said. Particularly the Advanced Peace Program. I just took a look at it while I was viewing it. Any organization that has Omar from The Wire on their board of directors has got to be good. It's, joking aside, it just looks that they are, one, they're locally based, and they seem to really have their finger on how to reduce
Oh, Dr. Canning, you cut out. There you go.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks. Just the results in Sacramento were quite impressive, and so I just want to commend Woodland Chief for getting this program up and running, and for the CCP for funding it. I think this is a really innovative program. I just also want to really thank the Sheriff's Office for increasing their funding for substance abuse treatment in custody. It's really, really important. And I think the piece that we have to make sure is there is that follow-up piece, as Ian says, those 2 weeks to a month to 6 months is high morbidity and mortality for substance users after they leave custody. And so we have to make sure to really follow up with them. And my thanks, of course, to Karen for all the work that she's done to put together the Crisis Now program. So thank you very much for all your work, and this is really great stuff. Thank you.
Julie, next.
I have no additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Well, I'll turn it back to the CCP for any further comments. And potentially a motion or so.
Fund them all.
Chair, point of order, I guess question, each individual proposal or the entire package?
That's a good question.
Whatever the motion is, someone's got to make a motion.
I'm
Well-
happy to make a motion that we pass all of the proposals as requested, knowing that we're going to be getting data and we can evaluate these programs over time.
Miller would second that.
And just a clarification question, is that, so that's, we've taken out the, one of the positions, Karen, the 100,000?
Good
And
point.
moved, and moved the crisis now to the innovations account.
Yeah.
And we'll see some more detail on the outcome and evaluation piece coming in the future.
So I would amend it, I guess, to say that we're removing the treatment coordinator that was originally suggested by HHSA because it's redundant with the sheriff's request. And we're moving crisis now to the innovation line item. But other than that, I would make a motion that we pass or accept all requests.
Chief Miller, with those changes, do you still second that?
So I second that.
Julie, can we get a vote of the executive committee, please?
Yes, Member Johnson,
Yes.
Member Larson,
Yes.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Olson,
Aye.
Member Raven,
Aye.
Member Vega, absent, and Member Fruitnik.
Yes.
Motion passes. 6 yeses and 1 absent.
Sounds good. I know we're running long, so I'll be quick on the next. I do want to update the group. Oh, Ms. Larson, I'll put you on the.
I just wanted to add one piece of comment about the Crisis Now model, and I'm happy to send out some additional information to some of the public that commented. But in order to maintain fidelity to that model, the goal is ultimately to have crisis responders not partnered with law enforcement. Because we're just starting the project, we are starting with the co-responder model. That's what both our mental health clinicians and law enforcement is most comfortable with today. But we've been very transparent that our hope is to eventually get to a model where it's mental health clinicians and peer responders, not with law enforcement.
Thank you. Just a quick next steps. Eric and I will be before the board on August 31st to give the board an update on the process that we've gone through and where we're currently at. And then our next scheduled meeting is set for October 11th. With that being said, I'll adjourn the meeting unless someone would like to continue. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.